So let's talk about what we have always discussed, and this is about security and safety of people in the country. Now, we know that there are various parts of, let's even just talk about major urban areas. In major urban areas, there are very many parts that everybody knows. If you actually go into this part, the likelihood of you being mugged is very high. If you go into this part of the city, the likelihood of you being attacked is also pretty high. Looking at the time of day it is, it could be during the day, normal day, when the sun is shining bright, but it doesn't matter. You'll be attacked. In some cases, it's about darkness. So those who could be attacking you are using the cover of darkness to hide and waylay you. Now, when it comes to women and sexual harassment and rape, then the issue of where exactly the hotspots also becomes a big thing. And that's what we want to discuss today, how bus parks are being turned into hunting grounds by sexual predators. We're joined by JUDY GITAU. She is the Regional Coordinator for Equality Now Africa. JUDY, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation again.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
It's good to have you back on the show. And is it called like...
Oh, it's freezing outside.
Is it that cold? When we come in the morning, it's usually cold. So yeah, it doesn't matter. But then, yes, it was hot.
It was warming up.
Monday, Tuesday was warm. Wednesday was warm. Thursday morning was warm.
And then it did
then suddenly, Thursday afternoon, it just started raining. Okay, karibu sana.
Asante.
So let's start by, first of all, just tell us about Equality Now Africa. Who is Equality Now Africa? What does it do?
Equality Now is an international, women's rights organization that works on the rights of women and girls. We are what we call a legal advocacy organization. We champion for enforcement of laws. Where laws are not present, we champion for laws to be present. And if they're present and not being properly implemented, then we hold states to account. And we do so in partnership with local organizations in different contexts, and so support those organizations to do the same, whether for Kenya, whether it's for county governments or whether it's for national governments, so that we address exactly what violates the rights of women and girls exactly where they are.
So in the particular case of Kenya, how long has this organization been in operation in Kenya, and what have you been doing in Kenya?
Well, we've been in Kenya for over 25 years, and we work on 4 main issues. We work on ending sexual violence, and this is across the board, either capacitating state actors, non-state actors on investigation and prosecution, and just supporting the whole process of prevention and response to sexual violence.
Yep.
We work on harmful practices, that is FGM and child marriage specifically. We work on ending sexual exploitation. And we also work on legal equality, or if you like, the ending theme is ending inequality in law. And at county level, we work in Kisumu, we work in Busia, Narok, Kajiado, Kwale, and Makueni. And of course, on national matters, we work with national government actors.
Okay. So there was a story in the Standard the other day. It had a big headline: bus parks easy hunting grounds for sex predators as cases increase. And it quoted Equality Now, and it gave some figures. So just give us a background of this story.
The quick background is, let me first start by saying we work with a local actor in a local organization in Kisumu, Kemet, who also works with a network of civil society organizations who work in each of the sub-counties in Kisumu. And they've been on the receiving end of survivors of sexual violence. I know we were lucky in the electoral period, let me say in the election itself and post-election, not to have the kind of numbers we've seen in the past. But we have been documenting actually an increase in number during the heightened electoral period. And some of the violations, and this is just to set up the context, women were, we had a report, for example, of a woman who was raped so as not to run for an MCA position, but didn't come forth and give out her name because the stigma that surrounds that as an issue. And so sexual violence has been prevalent in Kisumu, and just generally the Nyanza region has been quite prevalent in those areas. In terms of reporting, we have 1 in 20 women reporting. What happens to the 19? In terms of those who seek, 1 in 20 actually seek report, and 1 in 6 seek medical help. And so at the end of the day, the numbers that we then get either at the police level or numbers that we get at the end of the day are a far cry from actually the prevalence and the statistics that we're seeing on the ground. And so in this particular instance, it was just reflective. The bus stop is reflective of the situation on the ground. And just to take it a little bit further, as you were saying, that we all know the sports where you could be robbed or the sports where your phone could be stolen. Unfortunately, for the woman in such a context, you are a walk-in vulnerability. It's not where you walk. It's not how you walk. And if you see in the story, it's a pregnant woman and it's somebody else. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're a woman renders you vulnerable to violations of this nature, which is quite sad.
And are we seeing it in? I'm just looking at time gone by, where, because this is not a new. It's not a new thing. This has been quite, scary to watch over the last 15 years or so. So are we looking at an increase of this activity, or are we looking at this is just how it has always been?
I would it would be remiss of me to say is that we have not seen an increase. The certain circumstances around the globe, but specifically in our context, have exacerbated the situation. For our part, for example, during COVID, we did see an increase in number, and people could attribute it to stress and to mental illness and so on and so forth. But we've also seen, with moving up to the elections, again, an increase. Anytime the enforcers of law and order changed their focus of attention to other issues or other factors, we almost always see an increase in numbers. Anytime we've got a crunch in the economy, we almost always see an increase in numbers. And so over the past year or so, during the heightened electoral period, the numbers did go up. And so at the end of the day, we capture this across, whether it's the hospitals or the civil society organizations that have become trusted by these women and girls. We also have, shall we say, changes that are happening in law. Quite recently, a decision has been made that the minimum sentences that are there in the Sexual Offences Act that make it mandatory for judges to dish out a certain number of years for someone who's been convicted of rape are now being challenged and are now being overturned, not on account of the guilty person being guilty, but on account of the judges feeling that their independence has been interfered with, because the law says exactly how many years they're supposed to give for such an offense. This doesn't send a good signal out in the public. This makes certain offenses not as grievous as they should be, and this negates 16 years plus of work that put in place a Sexual Offences Act that was responding to a situation such as one that we're facing now.
Well, the mandatory minimum debate is broader than just the independence of the judges.
It is.
It's from the context of the judges even who've been pushing for this. It talks about even them just listening to a case, and in some cases seeing, does this person deserve this sentence that I'm imposing? And I think that's part of the debate as well. It's not necessarily the context of is the person guilty or not. It's very many other things as well in this debate.
Well, Eric, there's a history to this. Allow me.
Yes.
First, we sometimes behave like we're the first people to encounter certain challenges in the world. We're not. The judges were largely responding to the challenge of quote-unquote consensual relationship between minors.
Yeah.
So you find an 18-year-old with a 17-year-old girlfriend who are engaging in consensual sexual behavior. And you find that the parents, for example, of the girl discover this and they report the matter. And according to the law, the age of consent is 18.
Yeah.
And so statutorily, this is rape.
Yeah.
And so the young man will go away for 15 years. And so a judge faced with this will find that their hands are tied and therefore respond in this manner. But it is not new to the world. There's what we refer to as Romeo and Juliet clauses that provide tramways, if you will, or exit ways for such cases, for these to either be taken to counselling and so on and so forth. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecution has developed guidelines, for example, decisions to prosecute or decision to charge, where they find such cases and might not even bring those cases to court, because then they address them at that particular level. So to respond to these cases in the way in which these decisions have done, if this is the context, is to go at a fly with a hammer and to completely break not just the mold, but the entire system. So that is wrong. And then speaking of the history that led us, the Sexual Offences Act actually didn't have the minimum sentences when it was first enacted. This was in response to decisions by judicial officers that were informed by culture and tradition, where you find that people would issue decisions figuring if a 6-year-old girl has been raped, surely she's going to get better. And so it is not, we shouldn't subject this, 16-year-old boy or 20-year-old man who perhaps erred to a lifetime sentence. And this was completely wrong. We were sending out a horrible, a message out there. I don't know if people remember the Lee's case, the Justice for Lee's case out of Busia, where a young girl who had gone for her grandfather's disco matanga was raped by 6 boys, and the chief, knowing the boys, asked them to come and slash grass within his compound and found it to be punitive enough. So that's the history that we're coming from. And that's the history that informed the minimum sentences. And so when it transitions into a debate about judicial independence or about Romeo and Juliet cases, there's need to actually contextualize and to understand the society within which this is coming.
So, because I think now with this story that came out Wednesday, is that now we are looking at this through a new face. I mean, and this is on top of years of, this kind of sexual, and I want to say fear now. The act, the abuse, now it is fear that you cannot, as anybody, before we even get to being a female and being one in a more vulnerable place, you cannot, as anybody, walk or be in certain areas without this fear that something might happen to you.
Absolutely.
So then it is clear that the perpetrators of these crimes are becoming bolder and bolder. And one of the reasons why we see that perpetrators of crime become bolder is because there is no
accountability.
There's no accountability, number one. There is no action when it comes to prosecution of these crimes. Investigation of these crimes. I mean, we're talking about a chief having asked young boys and in time gone by to slash grass. So are we looking at that it is becoming, that the perpetrators are becoming bolder, and that in terms of actually getting something done about these things, that there's no appetite for justice?
In Kisumu specifically, so that I'm particular to that context that the story was based, yes, the perpetrators are becoming bolder. And that's on account of, several reasons. Accountability, the difficulty of the process for survivors to actually report and see a case through the end. Remember, we're starting from you going to a hospital and you getting, it's quite gross. You're swabbed and you're, investigated as a crime scene yourself. And then moving from there to the police station or vice versa. And then going to court. And then the case being postponed, and then going to court again. We have cases that have been running for years. And by the time you're getting justice for this, you'd rather give up. Then we're also talking about interference by the community in the case, that where a perpetrator is known, you have that they then begin to either threaten or compromise, not just the system, but your own family, and the pressure that is the social pressure that is brought to bear upon a survivor, that you do not want to be known out there then as a survivor, as a victim of sexual violence. Why don't we finish this matter? Why don't we address this matter? And everybody else is paid and dealt with along the system. So between these two things, the administrative and legal hurdles that survivors face, alongside the social pressures within the community that survivors face, make the numbers of cases that go through the system fewer and fewer. And so the signal that is sent out there, something else. The resources are also available to the duty bearers. What do the police have to work with in order to investigate? Do we even have the forensic capacity to actually investigate and prove and link the violator to the victim? All of these things are the challenges that are faced, but it is not in vain, in the sense that we bring us back to the 12 commitments that were made by the former president with regards to Generation Equality Forum. The practicalities of those commitments speak to this situation. They speak to the fact that a commitment by the government to put in place $25 million by the end of this year to respond to gender violence recovery centers, which are one-stop centers, so that a survivor doesn't have to go to the police station and then to the doctor and then to court and so on. You just go to one place and there's a response around this. They speak genuinely to full implementation of the sexual offences laws. What that means is performance contracting for all duty bearers. Right now, it's civil society actors that are training and working with police, that are sensitizing prosecutors and making them specialize in this as an issue. If this is part of their contracts and it's performance contracted, then they have to, as a matter of duty, respond to these as issues. And so the practicalities of some of these commitments is that their realization is a matter of life and death for women and girls out there.
Do we see then also that there is, because I guess that for every cause there's an effect, isn't it? So like, even if it was that you see, okay, over time we've seen that certain areas then have become, again, hotspots. And I remember around that time, during the development of the Sexual Offences Act, we saw this happening. Then I believe there were certain parts of Nairobi that became red zones,
Yes.
right? And there were those hotspots. And then we saw that there was activity by security agencies, the police and such, to do their patrols at certain hour. You would go to certain places. I remember the famous Valley Road was one of them,
Yes.
just outside the All Saints Cathedral. And then you would find that there would be, at certain times of the day, there would be a police patrol, right?
Yes.
Because that was front and center in the minds of people. Do we see that now that police are saying, hold on a minute, we are seeing that there's an increased activity around these bus parks? To even give a presence of security, are we seeing that maybe this is increasing?
Unfortunately not.
Even with this information out in the public?
Even with this information out in the public. Again, I would say that whilst we're in the privileged position of the gender agenda finally in this country being up front and center on the table, the past election can tell you that, that women's rights and women political participation and so on is at the table. Even so, it's a hard agenda to sell when people are balancing what are the priorities. When people talk about peace and security, or we don't hear this as upfront and center unless someone makes it upfront and center. And so even here, even so, the response has been from humanitarian organizations. The response has been from civil society organizations such as ourselves, directly engaging, for example, with the police and so on, to make them aware and have them respond. I'll have to say, though, that there are existing platforms which can cause, for lack of a better phrase, can cause civil society to enforce compliance and enforce response, such as one you're talking about. We have what we call, and not to be too technical, the Gender Sector Working Group, which the State Department for Gender set up in all counties, and which require police to sit in there, which require administration, the county administration to sit there, and which allow issues such as this to be discussed. But so far, the response hasn't been what we hoped it will be. It hasn't directly responded to the context of women being lured. And in this instance, it's not that she was there or the two of them were there late. It's literally intentionally perpetrators actually misguiding and misrepresenting to the extent that they then rape, that they then violate. And to come again from a context that earlier this year, there were women who were being raped even within their homes. The audacity, and that's in context in Kisumu, in Nyalenda, in specific areas, the audacity of perpetrators literally visiting, homes past a certain hour and violating women and young girls. The audacity, I recall through our partners, incidences of, because where you have not bathrooms but a pit latrine outside your home, a young girl going to the bathroom before she goes to bed, and the mother wondering why she delayed, only to find she's been waylaid on her way to the pit latrine.
Right.
So these are incidences, and they reported in that particular, it was earlier this year, actually long before the election. In that particular incident, the perpetrator, it would appear, had violated several homes because the report was similar and the conduct was similar, to the extent that if you investigate
within the same locality.
within the same locality and the same
Community.
circumstance, same, and so it became quickly apparent that this could be the same person, and yet investigations on that matter were not done. So we end up with a survivors forum with women sharing what has been your experience, and us then providing counseling and then transitioning them, but no legal accountability for what's happened. So women still live with fear.
So in such cases, like the one you're telling us about Nyalenda, so this is happening within a certain community where girls are being waylaid, women are being waylaid at night when they're going to use the washroom, the bathrooms. What does the community do? So are there reports being made with the local administration, the chief? Has it gone to the police officers at the police station? If you follow up in terms of accountability, when you say that there is no action that's been taken, what kind of reporting has been done?
So I will speak to those specific incidences, and hopefully they're reflective of, or unfortunately they could be reflective of, the situation. In those instances, we got to know about them because of our local partner that we support in that context, who walked with these women to report the matter to the police station, and then to have the women treated at hospital.
How does the partner get to know about them?
Because they are community mobilizers.
Okay.
And so they meet these women, they know these women, therefore they know the circumstances under which these women live. So being community mobilizers, you find somebody hasn't come to a meeting, someone hasn't engaged, and you follow up and you find what has happened to them. In some incidences, some of the women are aware because of the messaging that's been going into the community, and so they immediately come to the local actor for reporting to the police station. And so they do report the incidents. It is recorded, but then that is it.
But I'm following this process of reporting. So the first person that they report to is your partner.
It would be our partner, yes.
Not the local Nyumba Kumi, not the local community leadership, not the local chief.
In that particular incident, it wasn't.
Why?
Because you need to have trust. When one has been violated to such an extent, you need to trust the party to whom you report this incident. You need to know that they can do something about it. You're at a position of vulnerability, and in fact even questioning self. My engagement in some of this, safe spaces for these women tells you that before they open up about an issue such as this, they need to know it is okay, because some of them are still going through the process of self-blame. I shouldn't have, I couldn't have. And so where you have a partner who's already been strengthening them in terms of awareness and in terms of these are your rights and this is what you need to know, then they feel safe enough to either report to such a partner, or they feel safe enough to know they told me that if this happens, then 1, 2, 3. And so some did go to the police station directly. Some did have the partner accompany them to the police station. In some incidents, the partner would take them to hospital first and then take them to the police station. But then that was the extent. That was the extent of the matter, unfortunately.
Let's take a break at 29 minutes after 7. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, The Situation Room, broadcasting on SpiceFM and KTN Home, and also online on YouTube and Facebook. Our guest this morning is JUDY GITAU, Regional Coordinator, Equality Now Africa. We are talking about sexual violence, and the bus parks are emerging as the areas where sexual predators are actually on the prowl. And it's not an interesting story to discuss, but we've got to raise this and to talk about it.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
JUDY GITAU from Equality Now Africa is still here with us. We're talking about sexual predators. Back to that case study that you're telling us. So women in a certain community are being attacked, and they don't feel comfortable or confident to go to the authorities. So there's an intermediary that is your partner. Then your partner takes them to the authorities. Does your partner work on trying to build the trust between the authorities and the community? And what happens in that push?
Our partner does, our partner does. And our partner has both the medical and legal aspects within their own setup. And it's through the platforms that I'm telling you about, something we call the Gender Sector Working Group, or through the court users committees. Not every court, but at least every county has what we call a court user committee, which brings together the different people who administer a court. So the head of station, who would be a judge or a senior magistrate, the police, the prosecutor represented, and the different actors who would ordinarily use the court would be in attendance and would speak to the issues that are barriers to justice in accessing justice for the actors of that local community. So our partner is a member of the local Kisumu Court User Committee and would respond to some of these issues in this context. Also, within what I'm talking about, the Gender Sector Working Group, again, bringing together the local county administration and all of the different actors that respond to the county issues. Our partner brings those issues at that space. And just very practically, though, the Gender Sector Working Group has a basic WhatsApp group. And so whenever violations of this nature happen, they bring it up on that group so that the different actors, whether it's the OCPD or whoever it is involved in that particular process, can see that different things are happening in a particular area. But again, as we address that in terms of accountability, we also need to address the social context. We also need to speak to the fact that we still blame the victim, we still blame the survivor. I mean, hardly do we do hear a conversation about how when someone has stolen from you, Eric, for example, we don't attack you, shame you, or look at you as, oh, I'm so sorry, there goes Eric who was robbed. We think about, who was that? Who was the person who did this? But whenever we talk about a sexual offense, the survivor, the victim, carries with her the stigma. I'm telling you about the young woman who was vying for an MCA position and then was raped. And it is presumed that she was raped to stop her from vying for the position. And even she couldn't come out because of the stigma, because she would be identified as the candidate who was raped. And everything around that would be, what is that about? And so there's the building of trust with government actors and making clear what we call the referral pathway. I think everyone should be clear, and it should be a state prerogative that if this happens, here are the specific places you can go to immediately in response to it. But on the other hand, there needs to be an active engagement with the community to destigmatize the survivor and to ensure that people begin to understand that the blame lies with the perpetrator, and exclusively so. In terms of the clarity of the referral pathway, again, just underscoring the government commitment to have a one-stop space for the survivors, that in the event of a violation, even when you're most vulnerable or most disoriented, you would know, if I'm in a car crash, I'll go to an A&D in some hospital. Similarly, for violation, someone should know, in the event of this, wherever it is I am, I can go here, and the response would be adequate.
Okay, I'm going. It's going to be a difficult question, even as I try to form it in my mind. It's difficult to ask this question because I think it has been asked before, and to get an answer to it has been really, really difficult. We are dealing with mitigation measures. There will be rape, there will be sexual abuse, there will be sexual violence. We're probably even seeing maybe more cases of boys also being sexually violated in this manner. We deal with the after effect. Unfortunately, we are dealing with, so this person has been attacked in this manner, or there's an increase, then we must now increase security or have conversations around what we will do in the judicial system, or coming up with policy to make sure something is done. But unfortunately, we can only apply these measures after the fact. So my question is then, why do perpetrators of sexual violence perpetuate sexual violence?
Yes, it is a difficult question. Several factors, but the tried and tested, because save for mental illness and among other issues, it's a power issue. People don't rape because of sexual pleasure. Maybe a lot for an early morning show. People don't rape for sexual pleasure. People rape to exert authority and power over other, to dominate, to to reassert themselves or, just reposition themselves. It goes down to questions of, not just patriarchy, but for us to begin to understand the balance. You could see in different societies where, and I'm walking into murky waters here, in different societies where the male, for example, has been completely emasculated, then you see a spike in sexual violence because they presume that the least denominator, the weaker person within the community would be the woman, would be the child, and they begin to re-exert themselves in that particular order. You will see it in countries that have come from conflict or come from war. I hesitate to say this, but we work in some of these countries. When we work in Sierra Leone, for example, coming from the back foot of conflict, the statistics with regards to sexual violence were through the roof. And then when it wasn't women, it was children. And then it became younger and younger. And so you find the weaker person to sort of gain or grasp control or reassert yourself. And so rape happens, violation happens, sexual assault, sexual harassment happens in these contexts. There are those that, of course, it's poorly socialized. There are those that, are just, badly behaved individuals within society. And then, of course, there are those who have mental health issues too, who manifest it in this way.
So there are two things, Judy. So the first one, when you talk about looking at this power play, obviously, I mean, this is something that we've seen and it's been researched upon, and that is the case. So I'm going to come back to this bus park issue, which is what started this conversation. We're looking at the different bus parks. Let's just take Nairobi as an example, because far be it from me to say that's only happening in Nairobi, it is not. We're looking at public spaces in different cities the country through which this is happening. So then if we take that, explanation, would you then say, I mean, I don't know if enough research has been done or, questions have been asked, are we seeing the same people then raping, abusing at these bus parks? Is it, or do we even know? Because if that's the case, then it's somebody who's basically hiding out, waiting for the next victim to come along and repeating this same act on different victims. And then the other side of the question is that we've been sitting here for the last 3 years, but in the last 1.5 years, a day does not go by where we are not looking at a story or an incident of something that has happened that then can be connected to cases of mental illness. So also the mental illness issue has really skyrocketed in the last 18 months in this country, so much so that it's been called a national emergency, pandemic. Every endemic has been attached to it. So are we seeing then that in these bus parks, in these open spaces, that it's the same perpetrators that could then lend credence to this issue of the power play, the dominance?
So let me break down your question into possibly 4 responses. The first is to say that not every mental illness issue will manifest in rape or sexual violence. It manifests differently. People will it's varied, and so it's not that I'm mentally ill and therefore I violate, and so that the linkage therefore will not be as direct. I speak to people who, for example, who end up raping a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old. It's that clearly there's something already wrong in your mind. To be honest, if you're raping somebody, there's something wrong with you
already. Yes.
So it's not that mental illness equals sexual violence. Then the second tier is to say this, and though I have to qualify that I'm now just extending or extrapolating the argument of Kisumu across the board. I do agree that the violation isn't just happening in Kisumu and at the bus parks in Kisumu and therein. No, it's happening across the board. And if there's something that taught us this is COVID. As an institution, although we're not fast responders, our partners are. And as these institutions, as a collective, COVID taught us that violations were happening everywhere, in homes, across the piece. And the thing is that the violations, to be honest, weren't just rape, weren't just sexual harassment. The common denominator, as I was saying, is a sense of re-establishing control. And so, yes, it is happening everywhere. The perpetrators would not be the same one just waiting to lurk. It's that we haven't addressed this as a systemic issue. It's a discussion that we need to have as a society. It's a discussion that, for example, we as a women's rights organization, every time we advance the rights of girls to school, somebody will come back at us with, what about the boy child? But that person who does that response has no interest in the boy child. They're just interested in shutting us up about the conversation that we're having. Because I have an interest in the boy child. I am a mother of sons. And so I'm thinking, if I'm propagating that, I should be starting a parallel system to advance the rights of boys. And in any event, which boys are being married off as children in terms of child marriage? So some of these things need a national discourse that systemically begins to discuss, again, and I'm sorry, I think even last time I was here, I said this, that rights are not 10 balls in a bucket. That if women get 7, men don't only have 3 to contend with. But that all of us have rights, and all of us can access our rights. And can we just, all go to school and all, work hard and all meet at the top, as opposed to making it a zero-sum game or a competitive game, and begin to build a more healthy society, so that in order to reestablish their authority, you don't feel that you've got to dominate someone else who is presumed weaker in the society in order to reassert or to gain your control. Having those very basic responses. Then the third part of the response would be quickly to say, in having those discussions that are at a systemic level, and so that, to bring about equality within the society, that is the preventive. Because you're right, a lot of emphasis, color, whistles and bells goes to the response. So what we have, a pathway put out, great. So what, now we have an SGBV court in Shanzu, great. But what are we doing to prevent? Prevention is in those discussions. Prevention is in getting people to understand not human rights from a theoretic perspective, but begin to understand we are equal. This is how we engage. I am not disadvantaged if someone is empowered. Empowerment means we come to the same level, and to get us to a space where we understand that women, girls are human beings too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has your organization and the others that you work with and the gender advocates, have you considered establishing community policing units where you're dealing with these issues? For example, and now after realizing that there's a spike or there's prevalence of gender-based violence being perpetrated at this particular spots and bus stops and all, have you considered that in terms of, can you establish like a gender desk or gender policing unit at bus stops, at those notorious bus stops? Then those ones work as links with the authorities, because you're talking about, so the police are not able to not sending officers, increasing patrols in these areas. And he said because of very, very many other competing issues. But how about taking the lead?
Well, let me, and not to be a pessimist, community policing hasn't worked very well in this country because it didn't have a solid theoretical underpinning. By that I mean, everybody hears community policing, and you remember the tag that used to be toa habari kwenye kwa polisi. It's not, it's one-sided. It's about you reporting to the police, giving them, spying or, leaking out on your
Being
on your
the source
neighbor.
of info.
Being the source of information. So no. But I will have to say this, that the more sustainable engagement has been in the platforms that I've talked about, which bring police to a preventive discussion, which allows them to sit with, civil society organizations and begin to tell them, these are the emerging trends. This is what we are seeing. And then having them respond. Again, the most sustainable discussion is, again, in what it is, and not to belabor the point, the 12 commitments that were made by the government that speak to performance contracting, so that a police officer doesn't think that there's a gender desk and we tick the box, but it's part of my contract. And as part of my contract, it's not just part of my appraisal, but it will feed into what? My promotion. That if I'm gender responsive, I'll not just give a stick, I'll have a carrot to it. If I'm gender sensitive as a police officer, then it follows that I'll get a promotion. I can use this to show that I've met my targets, etc., etc. And so it becomes something that they want to do, that they look forward to doing. We have gender desks, Eric, actually in almost all police stations. But then the nature of resources at the stations is such that you'll have the OB desk and you'll have the gender desk right there.
Yeah.
And so as someone is reporting about a stolen item, they're also reporting about, someone being raped without the privacy that is required in that situation. And so two things, like I said, performance contracting, but at the same time setting up within the police station in a good way, a space that somebody, whoever it is, can come and report that have been violated. We've talked about increasing numbers of boys and even men being sexually violated in a society, for example, that completely frowns upon the weakness of a man. Can you imagine a man coming to report at a desk where someone is reporting a stolen chicken, that he's been raped, that he's been violated, that he's, in whichever form. So we just need to do with clarity within the contracts of all the various duty bearers, a commitment that is measurable with regards to responding to how they work on these issues, but at the same time, support administratively and through infrastructure as a priority. Not just a gender desk, but a comprehensive space where someone can report these issues.
We always talk about the vulnerable in the society, those who come from, low-income neighborhoods and such, being more exposed. And even you're giving us the examples, and we see that all the time. Now, if you look at the number of police stations in such neighborhoods and the number of people that they serve and the number of police officers that are posted in these stations, what do you think needs to happen so that then this issue can be better addressed? So we are saying, yes, this is a plot, and they have one shared pit latrine outside the plot. And if women are coming out to use the toilet at night, they find the perpetrator there. And it's dark. Right outside their plot, it's dark. So the entire neighborhood is dark. Going to access the police station, you are going through darkness. You go to that police station, the number of police officers attached to the station, then the amount of the kind of facilities that they have at the station. Do they have vehicles? Do they have... So what needs to be done then to help the community and help the police? Because you'll have individual police officers who are thinking, yes, I ought to, but I'm incapacitated.
You've blown the issue wide open. Gender is a development agenda. When we talk, as an institution, we talk about something we refer to as a multi-sectoral approach, and it's not what everybody talks about and says, let's all put our hands on deck. No, it's having a core coordinator within government and having distinct actors responding to it, including budgeting, including planning. Because when you talk about lighting, county governments need to begin to understand their role in gender, in urban planning and in lighting and in so on and so forth. And currently, as we speak, and so moving it slightly away from the police, but then we'll come back. Whenever we have resources going down to the county governments on gender, it's housed within this ambiguous omnibus that talks about gender, youth, culture, health, and, et cetera, because nobody understands what the role of the county government will be with regards to gender. Yet gender, as the Constitution has provided in its fourth schedule, is a concurrent function, both for the national and for the county government. National government has hived for itself that its role in gender will be the response, investigation, prosecution, and so on, as well as provide policy and regulation around that. County governments need to do it from that perspective of development. It talks about lighting. It talks about the supportive infrastructure for the duty bearers, such as the police. It talks about how they then, within the community, are able to prevent such. So yes, the police officer requires, proper lighting. The national government, of course, needs to resource, not just in terms of money or forensics, but in terms of numbers. Police officers dispersed within that. It's also an administrative question because the head of station would determine how many police officers are lent to a particular area vis-a-vis another. It's that. It's us meeting the global standards with regards to a police officer vis-a-vis a citizen, so that they're able to, again, appropriately respond to the situation. It's a question of capacity. Police officers needing to be capacitated to understand how they respond to these issues. And then lastly, it's what it is I was talking about. Not only are you capacitated, it becomes a carrot that I'll do this, and in return, I'll get a promotion, or in return, I grew up on the ladder in my career.
Right, and then I think going with the hope that even those who are agents of security, like the police officers that you're speaking of, beyond this, I almost don't want to call it quid pro quo, but I mean, when you're saying the hope is that you imbibe that morality whereby you carry it beyond a job, that these things should not be happening, that you wear it on your chest as though a responsibility whereby I need to make sure that these things are not happening, because then it seems as though so many things need to happen. Behavior change intervention. There needs to be, a continuous reminder of how high really the bar of right and wrong ought to be set, so that those who are the agents of security are making sure that this is actually happening. Is that too far-fetched a hope or desire that these things can actually happen? That the faith then that you put in those who are supposed to be watching the gate, as it were, that beyond doubt that theirs is for the protection.
It's not too far. We always must hope. But I'll start with a phrase my father always likes saying, asiyejua maana haambiwi maana. So we are starting with people who have just been doing a job, are overwhelmed, have other priorities. Look, the last election that we had, in 2007, when we had the post-election violence, properly speaking, we had women who would come to report that their house is burning, and also they were raped, and they were asked questions. And it's on record, if you look at the CPF report. They're on record of as saying that they were asked, so which of the two would you like to report, the burning house or the rape? And so we
can only take one.
You priorities. You're told choose your priority,
Yeah.
and so we're coming from that. So we want behavioral change, of course. We want people to wear this as a national value, as an individual value, of course. But before we get there, we've got to put regulations and policies in place. And similar to a workplace, we all have our personal opinions, but you'll have a code of ethics. And so put that in place to the extent that concurrent generations of people who begin to plug in to serve will find that this is the way of being and there's no other alternative. And it will catch up. I think it will catch up. But hope we must, because we've got to change. This is unsustainable. It really is.
Well, Judy, we thank you very much for joining us today and shedding light on this particular matter. There are very many questions that are coming in on social media, and on our contributions as well on the matter. Can we attribute the increase of sexual violence to the decline in the moral fabric of our society and the break of communal structures that protected women and children?
To a certain extent, sometimes I feel though that we overblame the communal structures, because some of the communal structures actually entrenched the positions that women are weaker, that women, practices such as FGM, other than the harm that they visit, for example, are to reinforce the position of women within the society. But yes, to the extent that then we have lost as a community our moral compass, this is true. But culture is dynamic. And we can rebuild our culture to reflect on where we want to go. And when we want to go is a world where nobody's getting raped and nobody's getting sexually harassed, and we do not have to have police necessarily for it. But in the event that it happens, there will be measures to respond to it.
Okay.